He is not reaching. That is the part everybody misses. In the oldest paintings of this moment, the one hanging in every Orthodox church on the morning of Easter, Christ has Adam by the wrist, not by the hand. There is no clasp, no meeting halfway, no arm extended upward out of the dark to be taken. Adam is gripped at the wrist and hauled, the way you pull a man out of water who has already stopped swimming. That image is roughly 16 centuries old, and nearly everything in it traces back to one document, not to Matthew, not to Peter, to a text written 300 years after the fact by someone who was not there, claiming to transcribe the testimony of two men who were. Here is how that document opens. They were taken into two separate rooms, and the doors were closed behind them. Each man was given sheets of paper and a place to sit. Neither could see the other. Neither could hear the other. They were told to write down what they had seen, all of it from the beginning, leaving nothing out. Outside in the corridor, the men who had brought them there waited for the pages. The two accounts came back, matching. Word for word. That is the source. That is where the Western world got its picture of what happened between a Friday afternoon and a Sunday morning. Everything you imagine when you hear that Christ went down and broke the gates and brought the dead out into the light comes from those two depositions. The shattered bronze, the crowd pressing forward in the dark, the grip on Adam's wrist. The two men had names, Carinus and Lucius. They were the sons of Simeon, the old man in Luke's gospel who held the infant in the temple and said that now he could go in peace. And according to that text, the two brothers were themselves among the dead who walked out of their graves at the hour of the crucifixion. There is one difficulty, and it is not a small one. The document was written roughly 3 centuries after the events it describes, and there are no men by those names anywhere in Scripture. So the question is not whether that account is beautiful. It is. The question is who actually came out, and whether anyone did.
I must choose.
That has an answer. It is simply not the answer the paintings give you. Jerusalem, in the spring of a year that falls somewhere between AD 30 and AD 33, the interval the evidence allows, and no tighter. Before we can talk about anyone coming out, we have to be honest about what the Hebrew scriptures say about that place. Because what they say is that nobody comes out. Ever. The word is Sheol, and it is not the fire and the worm. That is Gehenna, a different word doing a different job. Sheol is simply where the dead are. All of them, the good with the rest. When Peter stands up in Jerusalem 7 weeks after the resurrection and quotes the 16th Psalm, the word in his mouth is Hades, the realm of the dead, and the English Standard Version renders it exactly that way. Keep the two apart, and this subject clarifies. Collapse them, and nothing that follows will make sense. So, Sheol, the pit, the land of silence. And the Hebrew Bible is unrelenting about its geometry. Job says it plainly. The one who goes down does not come up. David, sitting on the floor after the death of his infant son, says something that has comforted grieving parents for 3,000 years and is also a statement of hard fact. He will go to the child. The child will not come back to him. The 88th Psalm, the bleakest song in the collection, asks whether God works wonders for the dead. And the question is rhetorical, and the expected answer is no. Hezekiah, recovering from an illness that nearly killed him, says Sheol gives no thanks and death offers no praise. Ecclesiastes says the dead know nothing at all. 5 texts, 1 direction, a door that opens inward and never outward. And this was not merely poetry to people living in first-century Judea. It had furniture. There is a Jewish text called First Enoch, circulating well before the time of Jesus, and found among the scrolls at Qumran, which describes the realm of the dead as a hollow mountain divided into 4 chambers. The spirits separated according to what they had done, waiting for judgment. That is not Christian imagination. That is the working map a Galilean fisherman carried in his head. Hold that map, because in about 36 hours, something is going to be claimed about it that nobody in that world was prepared for. The chronology is tight, and the law made it tighter. Death came at about the 9th hour of a Friday, mid-afternoon. From that moment, there was a hard edge approaching, and everyone standing on that hill knew where it was. Deuteronomy forbids a body to remain hanging overnight. The community at Qumran wrote the same requirement into their own temple scroll in their own words. Sundown was coming, and with it, the Sabbath, and after sundown, nothing could be done at all. So the burial was fast enough to be incomplete. Roughly 75 Roman pounds of myrrh and aloes were carried in, near 34 kilograms. And the point of that much spice was to hold back what everyone knew was coming. When Martha stood outside her brother's tomb, she said out loud what the culture assumed. By the 4th day, there is an odor. Decay was not a theological problem. It was a household fact. The tomb was cut into the soft limestone under Jerusalem, with narrow shafts driven back into the wall, each about the length of a body, into which the wrapped dead were slid feet first. The entrance was low, often no more than half a meter, so anyone going in had to stoop and crawl. That is in John's Gospel on Sunday morning, and it is in the archaeology, and they agree. Now, the Sabbath falls, the city goes quiet, and according to the 2 brothers who wrote in separate rooms, this is what was happening where nobody could see. They begin with the dark. They say they were lying there with their fathers, in the deep, in a blackness with no edges to it, and that a light broke over them. Not dawn, something else. A light that arrived from below the horizon of a place that has no horizon. Then a voice moving through the crowd of the dead.
The kingdom of heaven is at hand.
It is John the Baptist, and he is doing the only thing he ever did, going ahead of someone, telling everyone that he is coming. The forerunner a second time, underground, announcing to the dead the same arrival he had announced to the living at the Jordan. And then the argument. It is a quarrel between Hades and Satan, personified, standing on the inside of the gate while something approaches it. Hades turns on Satan and blames him. "You provoked this," he says. "You had him crucified, and look what you have brought down on us. He has already taken Lazarus out of my hands. One word, and the man simply left. Now he is at my door, and I am going to lose everything I have." Satan answers with the confidence of someone who has already lost and does not know it yet. "Hold the doors," he says. "He is a man. He was afraid in a garden. He asked to be spared this." And Hades gives him the reply that ends the argument. If he is only a man, then why is the darkness lifting? Then the command. And the words are not invented. They are the 7th verse of the 24th Psalm, a processional sung at the temple, calling the gates to lift up their heads so the King of Glory can come in. In the account, angelic voices throw that verse at the doors. And notice which doors these are. Not the fire, not the worm. This is Hades, the place everyone goes, and its gates are bronze, and the bronze gives way. What follows is a procession, and the prophets are its choir. One after another they step forward and speak their own oracles aloud in his presence. Not new words, their own words. the ones they wrote in life without knowing what they meant. Isaiah says his line about the people who walked in darkness and saw a great light, and says it to people who are standing in that darkness as he speaks. David claims the psalm about the gates as his own, and behind them, the others, each handing back a sentence he had written centuries earlier, finished. It is the strangest reunion anyone has ever imagined. A crowd of authors meeting the subject of their own books. And then, first out of all of them, Adam. This is the grip we started with. The wrist and not the hand. The whole theology of the scene compressed into where the fingers close. Whoever painted the first one understood exactly what he was painting. Everyone watching this has a name. Someone who went through that door before a conversation could be finished, before something was said, or forgiven, or asked, or settled. Someone you would put on that list if a list were being made. I am not going to pretend to know what that means for them, and I would not trust anyone who claimed to. But I would like to know who you are carrying. Tell me in the comments. Just the name, or just who they were to you. I read them, because the reason this account survived 15 centuries with almost no scriptural support is that it answers exactly that. It says the door opens from the outside. The story does not end at the gate, either. The freed are not left standing in a corridor. According to the same text, they are brought into paradise. And there they meet three figures who are already there waiting. Enoch and Elijah, the two men in the Hebrew Bible who never died. And a third, the criminal from the cross, still carrying it. Notice what that does. It takes the one man to whom Jesus spoke a promise about that very day and stitches him directly into the rescue scene. Whoever assembled this account was not being careless. They were tying every loose thread in the Gospels into one picture, and they did it well enough that the picture outlived the document. So that is the story. Now the harder thing, walking back through it to ask what actually stands underneath. And we start on the firmest ground, which is not where you would expect it to be. There is exactly one passage in the New Testament that describes human beings coming out of tombs in connection with these events. And it is 4 verses in Matthew. At the moment of death, the tombs opened. Many bodies of the saints who had fallen asleep were raised. They came out, and after his resurrection, they went into the holy city and appeared to many. That is it. That is the whole of it. And look at what it doesn't give you. No names, not one. No number. The word is many, and no source in any tradition anywhere, canonical or otherwise, ever supplies a figure. Any number you have seen attached to this was invented by someone. It does not say how old they were, or how long they had been dead, or what happened to them afterward. Did they die again? Were they taken up? Matthew closes the sentence and never returns to the subject. There is also a genuine oddity in the sequence. The tombs open at the death on Friday. The bodies enter the city after the resurrection on Sunday. There are roughly 36 hours sitting unexplained inside a single sentence, and Matthew does not tell us what occupies them. Mark says nothing about any of this. Luke says nothing. John says nothing. 4 Gospels, and one of them carries the story alone. And Josephus, who wrote at enormous length about Jerusalem in exactly this period, who recorded portents and omens when he thought they mattered, records nothing about tombs opening or dead men appearing in the city during a Passover. That silence is worth stating plainly. It is not proof of anything in either direction. It is simply part of the shape of the evidence. Scholars have gone at this passage hard. Raymond Brown, in his enormous study of the Passion narratives, treats it as apocalyptic sign language, the vocabulary of the prophets used to say what the death meant rather than to file a report. When Michael Licona suggested something similar in 2010, the argument cost him an academic post. That is not a manufactured controversy. That is a live dispute among people who take the text seriously about this specific paragraph. So the firmest rung on this ladder is a group of people with no names, no number, and no ending. And yet Matthew did not reach for that sentence out of nowhere, and neither did anyone else in that century. Long before there was a tomb to write about, Israel already had the words for this. Centuries before any of this, the prophet Zechariah wrote one line that contains every element of what we are asking. Because of the blood of my covenant with you, he says, I will set your prisoners free from the waterless pit. Blood, covenant, prisoners, and a pit. The Hebrew word is bor, a dry cistern, the kind of shaft they threw Joseph into and later Jeremiah. No water at the bottom and no way to climb out. The 107th Psalm goes further. It describes people sitting in darkness and the shadow of death, prisoners in misery and irons, and then says he brought them out and shattered the doors of bronze and cut the bars of iron in two. That is not apocryphal. That is in the book. Isaiah puts almost the same words in the mouth of God. Doors of bronze broken in pieces, bars of iron cut through. Whatever those passages first described, and their original sense was almost certainly exile and rescue in this world, the vocabulary of broken bronze and freed prisoners was lying in Israel's own scriptures centuries before anyone applied it to a tomb. And there is one descent image Jesus is recorded as claiming for himself, which sets it apart from every other text we have handled. He points at Jonah. 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth, he says, and calls it the sign. Then go back and read what Jonah actually prays from inside that fish, because the hair stands up. He says he cried out from the belly of Sheol. He says the bars closed behind him. He says the earth with its bars was around him forever, and that his life was brought up out of the pit. Sheol, bars, and brought up, written centuries early and quoted by Jesus about himself. Isaiah had also written of one anointed to proclaim liberty to captives and the opening of the prison to those who are bound. That is the passage Jesus read aloud in the synagogue at Nazareth at the very start, before he rolled up the scroll, sat down, and said it had been fulfilled that day. He was speaking about the poor and the blind and the crushed sitting in front of him. The tradition later heard a second floor underneath it. None of that proves anything happened. It explains why people were so ready to say that it did. When the early church reached for language to describe those hours, they did not invent a vocabulary. They found one already lying there, and it fit so closely that within 2 centuries, almost nobody could tell the difference between the vocabulary and the event. So the first rung holds a group with no names at all. Keep climbing. The second rung holds one man. He is dying beside Jesus. He has been convicted of something the text does not specify. He says one sentence, "Remember me," and receives a reply that is the only statement in the entire New Testament assigning a person a destination on that particular day. Today, with me, in paradise. The word is paradisos. It comes into Greek from Persian, and it means a walled garden. The Greek Old Testament uses it for Eden. Paul uses it for a place he was caught up into. Whether it names a compartment of the realm of the dead or somewhere else entirely, the vocabulary will not tell us. Scripture never gives this man a name. The name Dismas comes from the same late document we opened with. He is not described as coming out of anything. He is promised presence, and then the text lets him go. The third rung is a population rather than a person, and it is the passage everything in this subject eventually collides with. In his first letter, Peter writes that Christ, having been put to death in the flesh and made alive in the spirit, went and made proclamation to the spirits in prison, who formerly did not obey, in the days of Noah. 3 serious readings compete for that sentence, and no one has ever produced a knockdown argument for any of them. The first: these are the human beings of Noah's generation, and the proclamation reached them where they were. The second: these are not human at all. They are the fallen angelic beings of the 6th chapter of Genesis, read through the Watcher's tradition in 1st Enoch, where the imprisoned spirits are precisely those beings, bound and held for judgment. This reading has hard lexical support. The second letter of Peter uses a verb built on the word Tartarus for what happened to the angels who sinned, and Tartarus belongs to that same conceptual world. The third is Augustine's, later carried by Aquinas and by much of the Reformed tradition, that this is the pre-existent Christ preaching through Noah to that generation while they were still alive, and that nothing here happens in the 3 days at all. And here is the piece that almost never gets said out loud on this subject. If you take the second reading seriously, you have to take 1st Enoch seriously with it. And in that text, a human being is sent down to those same imprisoned spirits as an intercessor. His name is Enoch, the same Enoch the later tradition seats in paradise, waiting for the freed, which is a fair measure of how differently 2 texts can use one man. He carries their petition, and the petition is refused. Flatly. No release is granted, and the text is explicit that none will be, which means that if Peter is speaking into that world, the word proclaimed may not describe a rescue at all. It may describe a sentence being read. I am not going to tell you which of the 3 is correct, because I do not know, and neither does anyone else with certainty. What I can tell you is that the popular version requires the reading furthest from the plain sense of the words, and it is worth knowing that. Then there is the verse everyone reaches for. In Ephesians, Paul writes that when he ascended on high, he led a host of captives. That sounds decisive. But Paul is quoting the 68th Psalm, and there is a divergence in the quotation that is well known and rarely mentioned. The Psalm says, "The one who ascends received gifts among men," and Ephesians says he gave gifts to men. The next verse speaks of descending into the lower regions of the earth, which some read as the realm of the dead, and others read as the earth itself, in contrast to heaven. It is evidence. It is not a photograph. And there is something worth noticing in how all of these texts are worded, because it answers the question the title of this video raises. Every descent passage in the New Testament uses a personal pronoun for the Son. He descended, says Ephesians. He went and made proclamation, says 1 Peter. He was not abandoned to Hades, says Peter, at Pentecost. The old account we began with stages Christ at those gates, never the Father. Christian theology has always held those to be one actor. It has never held them to be one sentence. And running the other way, there is a sentence in Romans where Paul asks who will descend into the abyss to bring Christ up. And he asks it as a rhetorical impossibility, as the sort of thing nobody should be saying. That verse belongs in this conversation precisely because it cuts against the whole idea. As for Abraham's side, the chasm, the flame, the beggar carried to comfort, that comes to us inside a parable. Jesus is telling a story, And as we saw earlier, the furniture of that story was already standard in the Jewish literature of the period. He is speaking a vocabulary his audience already had. Whether he is endorsing the map or borrowing it to make a point about a rich man and a beggar is a question the text does not answer. So watch how the picture actually assembled itself. It came fast, and it came early. Ignatius of Antioch, writing in the first decades of the 2nd century, already says the prophets waited for him and were raised by him. Justin Martyr, a generation later, quotes a line he attributes to Jeremiah about the Lord remembering his dead and going down to preach to them. And that line appears in no surviving manuscript of Jeremiah anywhere. Irenaeus repeats it. Melito of Sardis turns it into liturgy. Tertullian takes a position that is specific rather than decorative. He holds that every soul goes down to Hades, Christ's included, and that only the martyrs bypass it. But the shattered gates, the dialogue with Satan, the procession of prophets, Adam by the wrist, that arrives with the document we began with in the 4th and 5th centuries. It is apocryphal. It was never a candidate for scripture, and it became one of the most copied texts of the European Middle Ages, which is why it is in your head right now, and the arguments about 1 Peter are not. Then there is the Creed, and this is the part that surprised me most in preparing this. The line, "He descended into hell," is not in the earliest forms of the Apostles' Creed. It is not in the Nicene Creed at all. In Latin, it turns up first in the baptismal creed of the church at Aquileia in northern Italy, and we know about it because a man named Rufinus wrote a commentary on that creed around the turn of the 5th century. And Rufinus, the very first person to hand us that sentence, tells us two things in the same breath. He notes that the clause is not in the creed of the church at Rome, and he explains that he understands it to mean nothing more than that Christ was buried. The man who gave us, "He descended into hell," did not think it described a rescue mission. After him, the phrase largely vanishes from Latin creeds for 200 years. The Church has never agreed on it since. Rome affirms the descent and reads it as the gates of heaven opening for the righteous who came before. Orthodoxy made that icon its central image of Easter. Calvin reinterpreted the clause entirely, arguing that it describes Christ bearing judgment on the cross rather than traveling anywhere. Luther kept a literal descent and read it as a victory march. Wayne Grudem has argued the line should be removed from the creed altogether. 4 positions, all held by serious people. And this channel is not going to hand you a verdict that 15 centuries of theologians could not reach. One last piece of housekeeping, because it will save you from something. There is a text circulating everywhere online under the title Josephus on Hades, quoted constantly as 1st century Jewish testimony about the underworld. It is not by Josephus. Scholars attribute it to Hippolytus of Rome in the 3rd century. If you see it presented as evidence, you now know more than the person presenting it. So, who did God take out? The most honest answer this evidence permits is smaller than the paintings and stranger than the arguments. There is one group described as coming out of tombs, and they have no names. There is one man given a promise about that day, and Scripture never tells us what he was called. There is a proclamation made somewhere to someone, and the identity of the audience has been disputed for 2,000 years. Every text in the New Testament that touches the descent describes speech. Not one of them describes an exit. The exit came later. It came from people who could not live with the silence. And I want to be careful here, because that is not a dismissal. Look at what those people did. Matthew left a blank where the names should be, and the tradition filled it with 2 brothers, a father borrowed from Luke's gospel, and a sworn deposition written in separate rooms. Luke left the criminal nameless, and the tradition filled that too, and then walked him into paradise, carrying his cross, so that he would not be standing there alone. Twice over, the thing this story does to people is make them unable to leave a silence alone. I think you already know why, because of the name you were thinking of at the start of this. The oldest question a human being asks is whether the door only opens one way. The Hebrew scriptures say it does. Job says the one who goes down does not come up. And then, near the end of that same book, God asks Job a question and does not answer it. Have the gates of death been revealed to you? Have they been shown to you? Have you seen them? The Christian claim is not that we have been shown. It is that someone went through and came back and said afterward that he holds the keys. That is the sentence in Revelation, and it is remarkably restrained. Not a map, not a roster, a set of keys and whose hand they are in. Everything else on this subject is people trying to fill in what the keys imply, and I would rather show you the seam between what we know and what we hope than paste over it and call the result history. If this way of doing it is useful to you, the sources named, the labels honest, the gaps left open where they are actually open, then subscribe and stay with us. There is more of this world to reconstruct, and we are working through it carefully. And if someone came into your mind while you were listening, someone whose door closed before you were ready, send this to them, not to the person who is gone, to the one still here who is carrying them. One last question, and it is different from the one I asked earlier. If the door does open from the outside, not from where you are standing, but from the other side, what does that change about the fear you are carrying today? I would like to know. I will be reading.